Hello again, students. How's it going? I hope everyone is doing well. Welcome to another instructional and educational class on the Victory Loves Preparation Network. As always, I am your instructor, Holland. Today's video is going to be a little bit different. We're going to be doing one half of the video in the classroom here with me, and then you're going to join me in the gym where I'm going to show and demonstrate the stuff that we're going to be going over today. And today's particular class is Basic Hand Striking Fundamentals for Combatives and Self-Defense. What are the proper fundamentals for striking in terms of proper techniques that you can learn to learn proper striking fundamentals so you can defend yourself should you ever need to put your hands on somebody. This video was heavily requested by a handful of students. They asked me to make this video because they themselves have gotten into the security or executive protection field and they want to be able to practice the techniques on their own, but for whatever reason they're unable to make it to a gym because of monetary issues, time issues. I know COVID is causing a lot of issues with certain gyms. Some gyms have closed down while other gyms are having a policy of no contact rules, so it's very difficult to train these types of things during this environment. With that being said though, that is why I am here. I'm going to show you not only the techniques that I would like for you to practice, but also some drills that I think would definitely help you. Things that you can do on your own without a partner, and all you really need is a punching bag. So before we get started with the classroom and the demonstration portion today, I want to hit on a few things before we actually start learning. And first things first. Today I am not going to be showing anything fancy or crazy. If you think that I'm going to be showing you some sort of really crazy, insane move like the 5-point palm exploding heart technique from Kill Bill or anything like that, any sort of no touch knockout stuff, any sort of pressure point stuff, any sort of crazy martial art type stuff that you'd see in like Jason Bourne, I'm sorry, but pretty much for all my videos, you're going to be sorely disappointed. The stuff that I teach is grounded in reality and actual physical-based combat. It's stuff that I have used in the ring, stuff that my coaches have used on people in the ring that were passed down onto me, and stuff that they used in their careers as not only martial artists, but everything from bouncers to police personnel and law enforcement to security personnel. At the same time, you have to understand that fighting doesn't happen like the movies. Fighting doesn't happen like the way that we think it would like to happen. Real fighting is very simple, very brutal, and in some cases very terrifying. You're going to be adrenalized, you're going to have tunnel vision, you're going to have an increased heart rate, perspiration, increased respiration rate. All of these things are going to add up, which is going to cause you to rely only on the basics, the fundamentals of fighting, if you will. And it's for that reason that today I'm going to be going over the very basic fundamentals of fighting. Because the fundamentals of fighting, I think you'll find, are the things that you're really going to use the most in an actual fight. The second thing I like to hit on is how much you actually have to practice this stuff. It doesn't matter what you do. You can't take an instructional video, including my videos, watch them, and then be proficient at doing what is in the video. I can't remember exactly who it was, but I had an instructor one time that told me that you might be a black belt in the gym, but when you go out and you actually fight for real, your skill level actually reduces because of all the previous things I mentioned, like tunnel vision and like an adrenaline dump. A black belt in the gym will be a purple belt in an actual fight. So even though you might be very, very good at practicing on the bag or practicing shadow boxing, if somebody's actually throwing punches at you with the full intent of hurting you or knocking you out or doing something worse to you, I think you'll find that because of those adrenaline dumps and stuff like that, your basics are going to suffer from it. It's for that reason that you need to practice every single day consistently, over and over and over again. A scientific study one time showed that it requires 10,000 hours to master one specific thing. So if you do 10,000 hours of practicing your jab, you've mastered your jab. Congratulations. Now you have to work on a whole bunch of other stuff for 10,000 hours. So while it may be difficult to make it to the gym, you can practice at your home, shadow box, do different types of drills. Either way, you need to make sure that you practice. And really quickly, the last thing I want to talk about is the legalities of actually having to put your hands on somebody. First and foremost, above all else, de-escalation of the situation should be your primary desire. It doesn't matter what the situation is. If you can de-escalate and stop the fight from happening, you're going to save yourself a whole lot of trouble and save the other guy a trip to the hospital. Situations might end up deteriorating very, very fast, and it goes from being a pushing and a shoving match where hand-to-hand combat is used to weapons being drawn. Next thing you know, you have a gun or a knife being drawn on you, and that's an even worse situation. I don't think people quite understand just how violent and just how bad it can be when somebody decides to get into a street fight. It's for that reason that you should always check out the legalities and the laws of the state that you live in regarding fighting and regarding self-defense. Every single state is different. I really am not going to make a class on what state's laws are what. I leave that up to you. As a responsible, prepared individual, you should look up the laws of your state so you can figure out what you're allowed to do in terms of protecting yourself, your family, or your property. I will say this though, when it comes to self-defense, if the situation has deteriorated so much to the point that you actually need to put hands on somebody and physically hurt them, then it's better to do it at that moment, save yourself and save the people that you care about, and then figure it out afterwards. But regardless, it is always a smart decision to figure out what is legal and what is not and what is allowed before ever having to put your hands on somebody ever. So with all of those things covered and all of those things nipped in the bud beforehand, let's get into class for the day. The first portion is going to be the classroom portion, and it might be a little bit of me talking, but it's going to help out when I show you guys the gym portion of the video. So if there are no more questions, let class begin. Okay, students, let's get into the classroom portion of today's lesson. Today's focus is going to be on hand strikes and hand strikes only. Kicks, in my opinion, are a little bit more complicated and require a little bit more training. So for that reason, I'm only going to be talking about hand strikes today. The hand combinations I'm going to be talking about today are going to consist of 3 different types of punches and 1 elbow strike. All of these punches are very, very easy to learn. They're very basic, and they're actually what you learn in basic Muay Thai or basic boxing. The 3 punches we're going to learn are jab, cross, and hook. I know that uppercut is a strike that is taught in boxing, but in my opinion, uppercut is one of the more advanced of the 4 strikes, and so for that reason, we're going to be leaving it out, at least for today. The elbow strike is a horizontal elbow strike. It's very easy to do. My old instructor used to say that elbows were one big slab of pain. They're an excellent close-range weapon, and honestly, if you know how to throw them, you don't really need to throw uppercuts. Uppercuts are important, but in my opinion, they can be replaced by elbows as long as you know what you're doing with them. Now, to make things easier, each punch day is going to have a correlated number attached to it. This is something that all combat sports really do that involves striking. It just makes it a lot easier for the pad holder or the coach to tell the student or the fighter who's getting ready what combinations to throw. And for our purposes, we're going to be doing the same exact thing. And the number system will work like this. A jab is a 1, a cross is a 2, a hook is a 3, and for the elbows, we're just going to say elbow. So if you hear me say 1, 2, 3, it's jab, cross, and hook. When you guys are practicing, all of these strikes are thrown from either the fighting posture or what we used to call neutral posture, or when I was teaching down at Pac West, we called it the fence. Let's go over both of those positions right now. So ideally, when you're practicing martial arts and when you're practicing self-defense or striking, you want to have a proper base from which you're able to throw all of your strikes and defend yourself from. This is why a proper stance is so important. The first one we're going to go over is fighting posture. It has many, many names, but basic fighting posture is the one that it's referred to the most. I know in McMap and the Marine Corps system, they called it the basic warrior stance. It doesn't really matter what you call it, just understand that the fundamentals are all relatively the same. There are 4 basic points that you need to remember whenever you're about to take a fighting posture. Chin down, hands up, elbows in, fist clenched. You want your chin down because if your chin is all the way up, my old boxing coach used to call it giraffing. What can end up happening is that your chin and your head are up above what is the defensive line of your hand, and you can actually end up getting hit very, very easily. You want your hands up. A lot of students tend to say that their hands are up when their hands are down here and they're fighting and they're practicing. I like to use what's called the rule of thumb. The rule of thumb basically states that if your thumb is high enough to touch your jaw, then your hands are high enough to protect yourself. If your hands are down low and your thumb can't really touch your jaw, you got to get your hands up because your face is wide open. A lot of professional fighters and a lot of MMA guys and a lot of Muay Thai guys, actually, you'll see a lot of the time they have their hands up very high up here. That's something I learned from my old MMA coach, and his philosophy was, in order for you to get to my head, you have to go through my hands. And the only way to do that is to get through any sort of defensive maneuver or any sort of shelling that I'm going to do in order to protect my head. If your hands are all the way down here, you're not going to be able to do that. Next, you want your elbows in and clenched close to your rib cage. Think about taking your elbow and trying to get it close to your hip bone. The reason you want to do that is because you don't want to expose your body to any sort of body shots. Trust me, body shots, in my opinion, are worse than getting knocked out because the entire time that you're on the ground trying to get your air back, or your liver's been hit and you can't catch your breath, you are not going to be able to fight effectively. The guy is going to see that and he's going to come at you, and now you have to defend yourself while you're able to barely breathe. And the next is kind of 50-50. Fist clench does not mean to have a death grip with your hands. You are not trying to white knuckle yourself when you punch. In all actuality, what you really want is to close your hand just enough so that way there is no daylight coming through the clenched fingers. The reason that you do this is because when you tense your arm too much, I don't know if you can see this in the video, but your forearm muscles actually tense, and the tighter and the tenser your muscles are, the slower you move. This is why you'll see a lot of MMA fighters, when they take their stance, they'll actually have their hands open. Then when they go to strike, they'll clench their fists at the very last moment they come over to hit. That's something that takes a lot of practice. If you're a beginner student, don't do that. So that's fighting posture. Now let's go over what's called neutral posture, or as I have heard it called in other circumstances, the fence. Neutral posture or the fence is essentially a self-defensive position that you utilize when somebody is coming up to you and you're trying to make sure that you keep distance. Unlike fighting posture, it is a very, very, very non-aggressive and non-dominant type of posture. The goal of the posture is twofold. The first is to try and de-escalate the situation by making the posture look as unassuming as possible. The second is to be able to maintain distance but have your hands high enough so that way if the guy decides to do anything, you're able to strike and block properly without having to bring your hands up. There are many different styles of fence. I know the standard one is where you have your hands up and you're kind of looking at the guy going, look man, I don't want any issues, everything's okay. Another style that I used to see was called the thinker, where somebody actually stands more like this. Okay, yes, I understand what you're talking about, but they can still block and they can still strike right from here. In the end, it doesn't matter what your fence looks like as long as your fence tries to do two things: de-escalate the situation and put yourself in a position to block and strike simultaneously. The fence is taught to a lot of law enforcement personnel, it's taught to a lot of bouncers and security personnel, and that's because the nature of security work and the nature of law enforcement work is we usually don't bring our hands up to fight unless it is an actual full-blown fist fight. What we're trying to do is we're trying to de-escalate the scenario, get the person to calm down so we can put them into custody or escort them out, but at the same time keep our protective posture high and open so that way when the person comes over and does actually try and start something, if they try and start something, we are prepared to strike back and defend ourselves. Having a good fence is also really important from a legal perspective because there's going to be several eyewitnesses to the event that just happened, and when law enforcement come and ask you questions and ask the bystanders questions, what sounds better? Oh, well, those two were having a spat, they were having an argument, one guy put his hands up, the other guy put his hands up, and then they just started fist fighting and that guy knocked him out. Or, well, they were both arguing, one guy had his hands up like this, he said he looked like he didn't want to fight, he kept saying, hey man, I don't want any problems, but the other guy swung first and the other guy did what he had to do. It looks non-aggressive, but you can very easily go from being non-aggressive and being neutral and trying to de-escalate to immediately fighting back. So, you have to understand the two types of scenarios in which these stances are going to be used. For fighting posture, if it's a full-blown fist fight and punches are already being swung, get your hands up to your chin and start to fight back. Another situation is if somebody shoves you and goes, hey man, let's go, put your hands up. If he starts throwing punches, well, then you have no other choice. Get your hands up and defend yourself. But if it is a verbal argument and it hasn't spilled over into violent confrontation yet, fence it up. Keep the guy at a distance. You don't want the guy getting close to you because the closer he gets, the less time you have to react in case he throws a shot. It's for this reason that most of the time whenever you're fencing somebody, you tend to keep your fence out a little bit farther and you usually tend to make sure that the guy doesn't touch your fingertips. All of the striking combinations that I'm going to demonstrate today are thrown from both fighting posture and the fence, and when you're practicing on the bag or you're practicing on mitts, you should practice firing them from both of those positions. All of the strikes that we're going to throw today are with closed hands. I know that self-defense martial arts often teach palm heel strikes. I have a few things to say about palm heel strikes. First and foremost, palm heel strikes are not a bad thing. If you actually end up drilling them and it becomes your thing, then that's good. Palm heel strikes can very easily be devastating. If no one believes me, I'd challenge you to look up Boss Rutan way back when he was fighting Vale Tudo and tell me that palm strikes can't be devastating. On the other hand though, in a very serious, stressful, no holds barred situation, what I've found out when I was fighting and all the different situations that I've lived through is that palm heels don't naturally come out when you're adrenalized. When you're scared and you're fighting for your life and you just want to hurt this guy so that way he leaves you alone and the situation is over, you're not thinking about curling your hand into a palm and striking. What's naturally going to happen is what your natural instinct is, which is to curl your hand into a fist and to strike back. So for that reason, I'm not teaching any palm heels today. I don't usually ever really teach palm heels except for one or two different types of strikes. And the strikes that we're going to be doing today none of them are going to be palm heels. All right, guys, so the classroom portion is pretty much done. In my personal opinion, you can't really have a classroom portion when it comes to fighting. You actually have to go out and get your hands dirty and actually practice the techniques on bags, on people, on different types of things. So let's go to the gym and let's actually practice this stuff. Okay, students, we're back in the gym. So if there's a lot of noise in the background, forgive me. Not much I can do about it. I can't tell other people to stop working out just because I'm here recording. So just try your best to listen in as much as you can. So I just got done with my lift. I'm downstairs where the bags are, and we're going to go over the combinations that I talked about in the classroom. I'll demonstrate them both fast and slow. We'll also go over some drills that I highly recommend you guys practice, not only for just straight up fighting, but also for self-defense. Self-defense requires us to work these combinations and these techniques from multiple stances, not just fighting stance, even though fighting stance is very important. So I'm gonna shut up, I'm gonna go over the bags. You're gonna hear me talk over the combinations and stuff like that. Try and listen in and at the same time watch. Okay, students, the first strike we're gonna go over today is the jab. The jab is labeled as number 1 in the numerical order of striking and is always thrown with your lead hand. There are multiple types of jabs, like the Philly jab from boxing or the inverted jab, but the primary jab that we're going to practice is the one I'm showing here, which is just a standard straight jab. The jab should be thrown with a full extension and full retraction. A common mistake made by students is they let their jabbing hand kind of drop or drift away when they're retracting their jab, which leaves you open for counterattack. Another factor of a good jab, or any straight line punch for that matter, is to keep the shoulder close to the jaw when the strike is extended. If you can see, my shoulder kind of rolls up when I strike, and that's because the shoulder acts as a natural shield for the side of your head when you strike. If you don't roll the shoulder, the side of your head can be open for the opponent's shots, which makes you vulnerable for counterattack. We want to be able to strike the opponent with as few chinks in our defensive posture as possible. The jab, while not considered a power shot, should be thrown with the sole intention of distracting or opening the opponent for follow-on strikes. It should cause damage such as bloody nose or watery eyes, which is an excellent way to ensure every strike you throw afterwards is free. A good jab should whip into the target, and no matter what punch, strike, or combo you throw, a good fighter remains relaxed and doesn't throw the punches tense. This allows for greater fluidity of motion and movement. Okay guys, so the second punch we're going to go over is the cross, or in the numerical order, it's considered number 2. The cross is going to be your power punch, and whether you're right or left-handed, it's always going to be thrown with the backhand. Probably the biggest difference between a cross and a jab is just the amount of power that you're going to get from your cross. I think ESPN did a study, and they looked at all the different combat sports, all the different sports that require striking, like boxing, Muay Thai, Luthwei, MMA, all that different stuff. And they did a statistical analysis on which strike scored the most amount of victories for the person that was fighting. And I think it was some sort of crazy number. I don't remember the numbers exactly, but the number 1 strike that came out with the most amount of knockouts and the most amount of victories for the person throwing it was the right straight, just the cross, because there's so much power, and because it's a straight line technique, it's very difficult to defend against. I have seen people knocked out with jabs before, but most of the time they're not going to be the toughest people. A jab is usually meant to set up your shot, which is the cross, but you're not going to see a whole lot of knockouts from the jab. That being said, the jab should be thrown with as much power as possible, but your main knockout punch is going to be this punch. If you notice, on the jab, there isn't a whole lot of hip movement, whereas on the cross here, there's a bunch of hip movement. The biggest thing you need to do is pivot your hip, rotate all the way, and then retract. This is kind of the standard way that boxing and MMA and Muay Thai teach their right straights or their crosses. There are other methods that I've seen, but honestly, this is the easiest way and probably the most common and most effective way. Again, keep your shoulder to your jaw, protect the side of your head, and when you extend the cross, make sure it retracts the same exact way. Let the hip fire the cross. Do not use the arm. The arm is simply the vehicle that is hitting the target. If you use the arm more, you're going to achieve a lot less power, especially if you don't have a whole lot of muscle in your arm. You want to take the arm and kind of fling it into the guy. This is the same as with any single punch or any single strike for that matter. The hip is what throws it and what provides the power and the speed. So now what we're going to do, guys, is take both of the strikes that we just went over and combine them together into the most basic combination that you can possibly learn, and that's the 1-2 combination. Just a jab and then a right hand, or a jab and a left hand right afterwards. The biggest problem that I see with this combination from new students is the timing. A lot of students, what they tend to do is they tend to throw the combination as separate punches instead of a combination that should fluidly move together. So think of it like this. If we had a metronome and the metronome goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that is how the punches should be thrown, without any pauses in between. Instead of 1, 2, a lot of students throw 1 and 2, so there's a pause in between the punches. Jab, bring it back, and then throw the 2. That's not the way the strikes should be done. Anytime you create a pause in your striking fluidity, it gives the guy an opportunity to retaliate or get his wits back about him, or to cover up and defend himself, or to react, and we don't want that. We want to throw both punches into the guy, and we want both punches to strike before he even knows what happened. So make sure that the combination stays fluid. 1 and 2, boom, boom, like kind of like a double tap. If everyone who's in the military knows what a double tap is, or a controlled pair, boom, boom. That is exactly how it should be done. No pauses in between the punches. As a matter of fact, when it comes to any sort of combination punching that we're going to talk about today, I'm not going to reiterate over it again, but make sure that no matter what punches you are throwing, all of the punches are thrown evenly and they're all thrown without any pauses in between them. Later on, when you get more advanced as a striker, you can start mixing up the different types of timing to throw your opponent off. But for right now, when we're first practicing and just for basic self-defense, this is the rule of thumb. We want to make sure that there are no pauses and the punches are thrown fluidly. Alright, so for our third combo, we're simply adding a lead hand hook punch. The hook punch is a pretty easy punch. It's what comes naturally to most people. Whenever you see someone who isn't trained and doesn't really know what they're doing and they're adrenalized and they're fighting, one of they almost always throw are just crazy hook punches. The only difference between a trained hook punch and a looping hook punch is that the trained hook punch is much tighter. Think about like a 90-degree bend in your arm while you're throwing the hook punch. The biggest thing with a lead hand hook is always to pivot. The pivots on each punching combination should help supply the power for the next punch. So if you notice, whenever I throw my jab, there isn't a whole lot of hip movement in the jab, but on the 2, when my cross comes over, I pivot all the way forward, and that's because I know I'm going to throw a lead hand 3, a lead hand hook. So my hips have to come all the way back. When bringing your hip all the way forward for a 2, you're allowing yourself a greater range of motion to come all the way back on the 3. This creates a lot of power in that lead hand 3, because a lead hand 3, generally speaking, does not have a whole lot of power unless you get the hip inside of it. So come all the way forward with your hip and then retract all the way back on your hip. Make sure that you pivot on your front foot whenever you throw that lead hand 3 in order to get as much hip power into it as possible. Obviously, once again, keep the elbow level when you throw the lead hand 3. Do not have the elbow point down. If the elbow points down, you're going to lose a lot of power and your form is going to be really crappy. The elbow pointing upwards, there is actually variations of a lead hand hook called looping hooks. We're not going to go over that today. We're just going to keep it simple. And a standardized lead hand hook has the arm at about a 90-degree bend and the elbow even with your shoulders. Again, as you can see, always keep the punching combinations fluid. It's 1, 2, 3, not 1 and 2 and 3. Think of the metronome. You can hear it on the pad whenever you're throwing punches. Boom, boom, boom. That's how it should sound. Boom, boom, boom. 1, 2, 3, not 1 and 2 and 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, students, so the fourth combination is 1, 2, 3, 2. It's literally the same exact thing as 1, 2, 3, only now we're adding another right straight. I don't know why students would get wrapped around the axle or lost in the sauce with this combination. Just do a 1, 2, 3 and then add another right hand. The beauty about this combination is that the hips feed the next punches that are coming to it. So if you notice, I throw the jab, I pivot forward on the right hand, I pivot back on the left hook, and then I pivot forward again on the right hand. And all of that stuff helps feed power to pretty much every single punch with the exception of the jab, which is our setup. If you notice, while I'm doing some of the combinations, I also do a little bit of head movement. This is not required. If you guys want a video later on in the future of me telling you how to practice head movement on the bag and stuff like that, then I will. But for right now, just kind of ignore that. It's just some stuff that I do just because I've been training so much of this stuff for my entire life that it's just kind of natural at this point for me to do it. In the end, what you should ultimately be practicing is the fluidity of the combination and being able to get it out there fast and efficiently without keeping yourself too open. Also notice that every single time that I throw a punch, the hand that is not being used is coming all the way back and retracting to my jaw. That way there is no opening in my defensive posture. So once again, keeping with simplicity, the fourth combination is 1, 2, 3, rear horizontal elbow. Literally just take 1, 2, 3, 2, take the final 2 and replace it with a horizontal elbow, and that's the combination. The biggest problem that students have that I find with this combination is that punches are mid-range weapons while elbows are close-range weapons, and students have a hard time differentiating how to be able to get their distance on these strikes. One of the best ways to help with this is that on the elbow, you can push off your back leg and kind of throw yourself into the target. Don't throw yourself into the target, but that's just the terminology that I use. Push off the back leg, burst forward, and get in range for the elbow. Another strategy that I'll show here, which you can kind of see me doing a little bit every now and then, is I throw the 1, 2, and then on the hook, I actually use the hook almost as like a wrap around the guy's head. I imagine my hook, instead of hooking him in the face, it hooks around the back of his head and pulls him in for like an elbow type sandwich type thing. This is not required, but it's another good technique that you can use. It's one that I've seen before in MMA, and in my opinion, very effective because it's just a different way of taking your strike and utilizing it for a different purpose. One of the biggest things that you're going to have to realize after you finish this combination is that when you finish the elbow, you are effectively at close range with the guy. So be prepared for vertical grappling if he's not knocked out or severely damaged. You can either vertical grapple him at that point, or what I would recommend is getting space and creating distance and then going back to striking. Okay, so now it's time for my favorite combination, and that's 2-3-2. This is a serious power combination, and that's why I like it so much. There ain't no better street fighting combination than this combination. My old coach used to tell me that there's no jabs in a street fight. You need to throw your power hand right away, and this is the combination to do it. You're immediately firing with your power hand, following up with a big hook, and then following up with a power shot once more time. I like this combination because it doesn't require a setup for a jab. You can throw this combination from anywhere and it feels natural. The power in this shot should be enough to drop anybody, and if it doesn't drop them, they should be so dazed and disoriented that the remaining shots that's needed to take them down are essentially free. Same exact basic fundamentals apply, keeping the shoulders to the jaw, keeping your hook parallel with the deck, making sure that the punches are chained together fluidly by the hips, and let it go on this one. This is a big power combo. And there should be no real setup. Just kind of fire your power hand, follow it up with a big hook, and follow up with another power shot. Okay guys, so this section of the video is just me demonstrating at the gym, striking without gloves on. And the reason that I did this is because I can't stand when people say, oh, well, the reason that sport fighters train with gloves is because they're going to end up hurting their hands and stuff like that. It's not true, okay? If you condition your knuckles well enough and you could just punch without gloves on, you're going to be able to punch just fine. One thing that I will say is that punching without gloves is something I'd recommend at least every now and then. It helps condition your knuckles, and it helps condition your arms and your wrists and stuff like that to take punishment without the gloves. You'll notice that I'm wearing hand wraps on. Hand wraps aren't really required for this whole thing. They really don't make a difference in terms of protection for your knuckles or your hands. What they do end up doing a little bit, however, is supporting your wrists a little bit. And that's just something that I like to have because, you know, after doing this for so long, eventually what can happen is you start to, you know, get pains in your wrists and everything. As long as you punch correctly, though, and you keep some wraps on and stuff like that, your wrists will be just fine. I've been doing this for, 20 years now. And my wrists feel fine, my fingers feel fine, nothing hurts, and it just goes to show that if you do it properly, then you can actually train bare knuckle without having to worry about injuries. I'm not really throwing any specific combination here, I'm just going through the different combinations that I talked about already, so you guys can kind of see how they work with without the gloves on. One thing that you'll notice is that when you take the gloves off and you decide to punch bare knuckle or with just wraps on is that your punches feel way faster. This is one of the other benefits of going from gloves to bare knuckle and back and forth from bare knuckle to gloves and stuff like that. And that's because usually when you train with boxing gloves, you're training with certain ounce gloves. I personally train with 16 to 18 ounce gloves. And the reason I do that is because I want the extra weight on my hands. So that way if my hands are bare knuckle, which they are most of the time when I'm not training, and I decide to punch something, I'm going to be able to punch faster because my hands are used to that added weight. So give it a try sometime. Punch a long time with gloves on, take the gloves off, give a bare knuckle a try on the bag, and you'll feel much faster. You'll feel totally different, and it's quite amazing what that type of training can do for you. Okay, students, so now we're going over striking from fence position. This is one of the things that you have to practice constantly. It's going to feel a little bit weird, especially when you're used to practicing from a fighting posture, but it's super important because in self-defense and personal protection, this is a lot of the time the position that you're going to be in whenever you have an aggressor come up and try and start something with you. So I go through a few different fence positions here. I do the standard fence where your hands are up. I do what's called the thinker, one that I showed before, where your hand is up on the side of your head and you're kind of like looking like you're going to listen to the guy, and then you end up striking. And then I do also ones where my hands are in front. This is kind of like the one that we use a lot of the time in executive protection. When I was doing executive protection down in Los Angeles, we want to look imposing and intimidating while at the same time looking professional. And whenever I was in a suit or whenever I was standing around a client at a big event, this is the position that we used a lot. So what I would suggest is taking each of these poses and each of these fences and striking from there. Stand in front of the bag, and what you should be trying to do when you're doing these fencing positions and the strikes from them is you should be attempting to give nothing away. Whenever you are about to strike from the fence, you want to make sure that there are no tells. You're not cocking your arm back. The subtlety in the way that your eyes move, the fast twitch motion of your body has to be covered up as much as possible. What you're trying to do is lull the guy into a false sense of security, and by doing that, you don't make him think that you're going to strike him until at the very last second when you actually end up hitting him. This surprise attack, so to speak, is one of the best ways to achieve a knockout and to end the situation as fast as possible, because the guy is not expecting to get hit. Trust me, it's the punch that you don't see coming a lot of the time that's going to be the one to knock you out. I've been hit by some pretty big dudes, but because I saw the punch coming, my body, it's very strange, your body almost ends up bracing for it and can take much more punishment if it sees it coming. Whereas if you don't see the punch coming and it kind of comes out of nowhere and it hits you, then your body's going to end up getting, knocked out way easier. So stand in front of the bag, put yourself in a fence type position, doesn't matter which one, and from there try and strike as quickly as possible without giving anything away. A lot of the time you'll hear in martial arts, well, we don't strike somebody unless they try and hurt us first. Yes, that's the ultimate goal, but realistically speaking, in the real world, things don't happen like that. Sometimes you are going to have to strike the opponent first, and sometimes it's the wisest option to hit them first and knock them out and end the situation before it boils over into the conflict stage. You can usually tell certain types of aggressive behaviors that are indicating when somebody is about to attack. If those indicators are occurring, I'll go over those indicators in another video if you guys wish, but if you start to see those indicators occurring and you're thinking to yourself, man, this guy is about to hit me, it's always the best option to strike first, end the situation, and then deal with it afterwards. I know there's that old saying of I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. I know it's kind of cliche to say, but quite honestly, it is the truth. I'd like to have my day in court where I can argue and articulate what I thought was going to happen and why I felt the need to defend myself, rather than having to be put in an early grave because I desired to be nice to this person when it was clear they're about to hurt me. Okay, so this is the swinging bag drill, and the whole goal of this drill is to help simulate an approaching opponent. So what you should do is you should stand in front of the bag, give it a push so that way it swings back and forth, and then assume a neutral or offensive posture in front of the bag, and as it swings back towards you, throw whatever combination you want. It can be a single really powerful right hand, it can be a 2-3-2, it really doesn't matter what the combination is as long as it's a powerful combination. What I want you to try and do is get the timing down, so that way when the bag swings forward, think about the bag swinging forward as an opponent who is approaching you. You've pretty much tried everything to de-escalate the situation, it hasn't worked, and now you have to end up hitting this guy first. You're going to find that it's actually a little bit more difficult to try and hit a target that is moving forward towards you, invading your personal space, and that is the entire goal of the drill. It's to get you comfortable striking at a target that is coming forward towards you or even moving away, and you have to get your timing down in order to feel better about striking. In my opinion, it's one of the best ways when you lack a partner to actually practice these techniques on. It's one of the best ways of simulating a partner that's coming forward towards you. Now, the ultimate goal of working these combinations and working these fundamentals is to be able to blend all of it together into a series of strikes that are going to drop the opponent without having to really think about it. When you guys are first beginning, you're going to be thinking, okay, I'm going to throw a 2-3-2 or I'm going to throw a 1-2-3. In the end, what should end up happening is you should be able to just kind of flow. When you start to become really, really good and you start to understand the basics more and more, you actually end up what's called a flow state. I've heard a lot of fighters call it that before, where you're not really thinking. You're just kind of throwing punches and you're throwing shots and everything kind of moves naturally, and that's because you've trained for so long that this is just a natural thing. So in the next clip that I'm going to show, it's a video of me doing bag work. It's unedited and stuff like that. I just kind of threw it in there so that way you guys can have an idea of what you should be kind of moving like eventually as you start to get more comfortable flowing and throwing shots without having to think about every single individual combination that you're throwing. All right, guys, and the last drill that we're going to talk about today is shadowboxing. Shadowboxing is such a heavily underutilized staple of drills in the martial arts community that it's ridiculous in my opinion. Pretty much every single day, in my personal opinion, if you are a martial artist, you should be shadowboxing. It's so important in developing speed and power and combinations that if you don't do it, then in my opinion, you're severely lacking in terms of how you drill. I used to be one of those individuals that thought that shadowboxing was kind of useless. I would always just hit the bags and do mitts with my old coach, Jody. He was my boxing coach. And one thing he told me actually was that he told me, Holland, if I don't see you doing 3 rounds of shadowboxing in the mirror before class starts and 3 rounds of shadowboxing in the mirror after class ends, then I am not going to do mitts with you ever again. He did this because he knew I wanted to be a fighter and he knew how important shadowboxing was. And after I started shadowboxing in an attempt to get him to do mitts with me, I was so surprised at how effective my striking had become just from doing this drill. It is so important. You can do it in your apartment. You can do it in your garage. You don't require any equipment. It's an excellent workout, and at the same time, it helps you string together combinations in that no-mind sort of flow state that I was previously talking about. Just start striking at an imaginary opponent, pretend to strike and fight an imaginary opponent, and do it that way. It's so effective and it's so good. You need to do it. If you aren't doing it, you're severely lacking and missing out. So students, in conclusion, those are the techniques, the combinations, and the drills that I really want you guys to practice over and over again, especially every single time that you go work out. I know that it's difficult to try and train nowadays with the gyms closing down, some gyms unable to reopen again because of financial issues or COVID or just the laws and stuff like that governing COVID. But in the end, it is not an excuse. There is always a way for you to train. The best fighters on the planet still practice their basics and still practice the fundamentals. That's the stuff they use every day, and it's the stuff that works. I know the stuff I showed was not fancy or really, really cool, but once again, that is not the stuff that actual fighting consists of. Real fighting is basic, real fighting is brutal, and like I said before, real fighting can be very scary. It's the basics you're going to use, and if your basics are at an extremely high level, you're going to be able to defend yourself just fine. Now, the bag work and stuff like that is only one piece of the whole puzzle. In order for you to get better, you not only need to do basic bag work, but you also need to do mitts, you need to do shadow boxing, and in my personal opinion, you need that push of individuals who are going to resist you and fight back against you, i.e. sparring, live rounds, live grappling. All of these things are really going to determine who is the better person and who is the worst fighter. I've seen people who are really, really, really good on the bags unable to really fight because they aren't used to punches being thrown back at them. I've seen individuals who have amazing technique practicing and demonstrating techniques on a person who's just kind of standing there letting it happen completely fall apart when they go up against somebody who starts to fight back. Their technique is awful. It's for that reason that you need to get those live rounds in. My suggestion is if you don't have a gym that you can go to, maybe you have some lifting buddies that are also into martial arts. Maybe you can get some buddies who are into martial arts and you guys practice together. When I was fighting back in Connecticut, I had a buddy named Nick. He's a law enforcement officer as well. And every single Friday we would go and we'd meet up at his barn over in Connecticut. And we'd go up into his barn where he had a wrestling mat. It wasn't a very big space, but it didn't need to be. And we would get several live rounds in. We'd spar for a good hour. Sometimes he would have guys who were on the law enforcement team with him come over. And fellow cops of his who would come and they'd spar and they would just get working. I was a fighter, he was a fighter, we prepare each other for fighting, and the cops that came over to practice with us, they prepared themselves for the streets. So it just goes to show that you do not need to go into a gym every single time in order to get live rounds. Go over and get some friends who are into martial arts or get some buddies of yours who are lifting with you into martial arts, and you guys can help each other grow and get better. One thing you're going to need to really work on is your cardio conditioning. I'm sure a lot of you have figured it out, but when you go and you start doing the bag work and you start doing the drills, you're going to get tired very quickly. Fight cardio is totally different than like running cardio and stuff like that. I've seen guys who are really good runners go and start to do mitts and within a minute start to just gas out. In my opinion, fighting is probably the most physically demanding sport on the planet. So while big muscles and lifting and stuff like that and having muscular endurance is really important and strength is really important, cardio is the number one thing you're going to need outside of proper form and technique. I've seen many, many fighters who were really, really skilled and better than their opponent not take the fight seriously, not train seriously, while their opponent did, and the underdog won because when they came in, their cardio just failed them. Your speed goes down, your reaction goes down, your power goes down, your ability to think logically goes down, and a lot of the time, your will to fight goes down. I mean, how many times have you had a situation happen where you were exhausted and the thought in your head is, oh man, I'm so tired, just whatever, just take me, let it happen. That can't be the case. You have to have cardio that matches your physical ability to fight back. In my personal opinion, whenever I go and I train on the bag, I do a bare minimum of 3 3-minute rounds with 30 seconds to 1 minute rest periods in between. The reason I do this is because that is the standard amateur fighting rounds that happen in MMA, at least in Connecticut where I was fighting. I know some states like California, it's 3 2-minute rounds, but I like to push myself a little bit more, so I do 3 3-minute rounds. Sometimes on good days where I'm feeling really, really good, I'll push myself to 3 5s, or sometimes even 5 5s. That's the standard amount of a championship round for professionals. You need to be able to fight for a very long time, and even though we want to end the fight immediately, we still need to be able to go past that level if the situation de-escalates to a long, drawn-out fight. So that is it, students. I hope you enjoyed what you saw. Continue to practice. I hope that the video that I made today was educational and help a lot of you figure out how to work some of these basics. I hope it helps you with your confidence and feeling that you can defend yourself a little bit better. And I also hope it gets you in better shape. If you like what you saw, well then you know what to do. As always, I am Instructor Holland. This is VLP Network. Stay safe, stay prepared, stay healthy, and stay trained. Class is dismissed. Be safe. Have a good one.